Dearest Queers, good morning. I'm Doolin. I'm a healer and mentor, and I work with queer and trans folks struggling with feelings of loneliness and disconnection. So I dish all kinds of strategies around connection, and I do that through a trauma-informed lens with a bit of a spiritual slant. So thanks for joining me this morning. This is the first ever Dearest Queers episode, which I'm excited about. A little context for this series is that around mid-May I sent out a survey both to my mailing list, and then also I posted it in the Queer Exchange Facebook group for the Twin Cities, just asking people, because it was kind of like still deep pandemic social distancing time, just asking people like what they were struggling with in terms of connection and feeling connected and feelings of loneliness. And the responses I got from folks were just so real and tender and vulnerable. People were asking like great questions. And so I thought that this, like running a little like weekly series, kind of like Q&A show, was the quickest way to start to address some of those questions and get some of that content out there instead of spending, I don't know, weeks or months trying to like hunker down around some offering that would meet all of those needs, which is to like bring those questions here and to start to address them. So that's the intent of this weekly live. And so, yeah, here we go. The first question that I'm going to talk about today is, how can I become more comfortable alone? And so to the asker, I just want to say that I love you and I see you, and thank you for asking this question. I think they're asking it for a lot of people. A lot of people wonder that are holding that question for themselves, so thank you for that. Before I answer it, I want to get real about a couple of things. One is that I think that this question is relevant regardless of the fact that social distancing is it feels less intense than it was. I feel like late April, even early May, when we were getting kind of like restless and it had been going for a while. So I think that the question, even though the quarantine is somewhat lifting and people are interacting more in socially distant ways, I think that this question is still highly relevant. My guess is for this asker and for folks before, that the question existed for them before the pandemic started, that it was exacerbated during that time. And the way things, work in our lives is that if we don't address them to the extent or the roots at what they're wanting to be addressed, that they will continue to exist and hang out. So the question is still relevant. Second, I want to be real about, in terms of my approach and how I work with things, is that I'm not going to be a like meme generator and be like, being alone and being lonely like are different things, which is true, or like give you a list of 15 ways to like be your own BFF. Like, all beautiful, I like love those things, but that's not my approach. That's not how I'm gonna do it, because although again, no critique of those things, because I used to consume memes like that and articles like that, like it was air, like this sort of like desperate grasping for like wanting that information. And that's because I just like wanted a quick and easy way to like feel less terrible about myself. And so I get the allure and the pull and the function of those things existing. But my approach, the reason that I'm not gonna like, send out those like love light memes, is because those are externally like behaviorally focused strategies and things. And that, so when we're focusing on the external things to make us feel better, like going and volunteering when we're alone and being more comfortable, or like cooking ourselves an amazing dinner, taking ourselves on a date, or like finding a hobby, like all of those things, amazing, but they're externally focused. We're looking to something outside of ourselves to make us feel more comfortable with ourselves. And so none of those things are the generators of peace and ease and comfort with yourself. Do you know what is the generator of those things? You are. I'm going to say that again. You, us, all of us, we are the generators of our own peace and ease and comfort. And so the work, when we're talking about being more comfortable with ourselves, it starts here. It starts on that level, the internal. We're doing that like deep foundational work to begin to shift things. not looking to these external things. And while those, again, those are okay, and we can begin to bring those into our like lives and worlds, like in as we're getting to know ourselves and develop a relationship, and that's what it means to like enjoy our own company, right? But until we have that foundation built, all of those things will fall flat on top of that. And I can almost guarantee that if you're seeking the comfort through one of those things, it will continue to feel empty, or you'll continue to feel lonely, or you'll continue to wonder why taking yourself out on that sexy date like didn't make you feel any less like shit. So how do we like impact or get to that level of change then? That like starting here with us internally, right? So I can talk about that in contrast to these other external ways, but how do we actually do that? And I think that was always some of my frustration when I was embarking on my own work with this, was like, great, I can like read these articles, but like what does it actually mean to like get comfortable with myself? Or like this whole thing around like self-love or like self-accept, like what does that actually mean though? Like literally, can I feel that in a tangible like way in my body? And so to the person who asked this question around how do I get more comfortable with myself, I would ask them, like, what is uncomfortable about being alone for you? And there's no judgment in that question. I think that bringing that is this like curiosity and allows us to unpack like the original question a little bit, right? So when you find yourself alone, when the busy stops, all these things we pack our calendar with, all these hangouts, when we are forced to socially distance in the middle of a collective pandemic, like take a moment to like check in, to like settle in, and like what is happening in your body, like what do you feel in your body, in your heart space, and like what stories are you telling yourself about what it means to be alone, Like, so in terms of the feelings, are you feeling fear? Is it panic? Do you feel abandoned? Do you feel sad? Do you feel grief? Like what comes up in the body around that? And then your mind, like, is it that seemingly everyone else around you, like when the pandemic started and everything was shut down, like it seemed like everyone else had like a pod or a throuple to like quarantine with, and like you were left out of that? Do you have judgment about the fact that you struggle with being comfortable with being alone? Like what what comes up in the body, and what stories does the mind have about that as well? So I think really checking in with those and paying attention to what's coming up with that, because that's where the real work begins. That's when we can begin to like settle in and sift apart and really hold and see what it is that is coming up. So I think my answer to the question of how do you be more comfortable with yourself alone, is that your level of being comfortable with yourself is a direct reflection of how you could be more comfortable with yourself when you're alone. I know that sounds like circular reasoning, but just bear with me for 1 second. So when all of those feelings come up that we talk about discomfort and fear and sadness or panic or all of these stories, how do you relate to those as they come up? Like, are you judging them? Like, do you welcome them with open arms, with care? Most of us were not taught to relate to ourselves in that way, with the care, with like the welcoming. And especially as queer and trans bodies and folks in the world where we've received messages from multiple lines about like our wrongness in some way, or our lack of worth in some way, like our internalization of that means that we often treat ourselves in the same way. And so if that's how we're approaching the stuff that's coming up, like that's the place to start. So if we're judging what's coming up, we are sending the message to ourselves that I am not comfortable with you. And so if we are not comfortable with ourselves and what is coming up, it is impossible for us to be comfortable alone or with ourselves. So we're talking about how we're relating to ourselves, which then impacts how we are out into the external world as well. So the work begins with getting comfortable with all of us, with our experience, with these feelings, with these stories, and beginning to welcome them in, to say, I see you, and I love you, and you belong here, and working to get comfortable with all of that experience that is coming up in the discomfort. And then rinse and repeat. And remembering that this is a practice, like this is not again, this is why I don't do the like 5 steps to blah blah blah. Some of those practical things can be really helpful, but this is a like developing a relationship with oneself. It like is not it's not super pretty, like bells and whistles kind of work, but it is the most rewarding and the thing that will actually impact your experience in the world and how comfortable you feel in the world and with yourself as well. So, and I think when we get comfortable with and like welcome in what's happening internally and with our experience and with these stories, is that then, if you want to make yourself like an amazing, sexy dinner, or you want to like start this hobby or like carve out this creative space, that's because it's like coming from here. You're like hearing it. You like are in relationship with yourself, and yourself is then saying, you know, make me a hot steak for dinner, or is saying, wow, I'm feeling really this like urge to, I don't know, watercolor or like something, whatever, I don't know, take a Zumba class, I don't know. But like that's then, instead of like doing these external actions trying to make ourselves feel better, do you see it comes from like our source first, starting from within and then going without, rather than doing it the other way, doing all of these external things and expecting ourselves to feel better. So it's just reversing often what we're taught, is to like have all this filler externally and starting within first. And how do I become comfortable with all that is arising in this discomfort of being by myself? And so I also want to just acknowledge that this practice of returning to ourselves and making space for these feelings, like if we aren't practiced at it or don't have a regular practice of it, it can be super triggering or overwhelming. Like if it doesn't feel safe to be in our bodies and to open to these experiences, that it can it can flood us. It can just be too much. And so I want to encourage, if that's the case for you, if you don't have support, please, like, I welcome and encourage you to reach out to me. We can get you connected to the best kind of support for you to help with that process, whether that's a coach or a therapist, or some other sort of like peer support that helps in this process. Because yeah, again, if we're not practiced or aren't used to doing it, it can really be a lot when we are like greeting ourselves for the first time and making space for all of the things that arise in this discomfort, of being alone and with ourselves. So, yeah, that's what I have for you this week, Booze. I appreciate you being here and watching this. If you have a question about all things connection related, I would love for you to send that via DM and encourage that. I will be back here next Monday morning at 10 Central Daylight Time, for another question. People send so many questions, beautiful ones, that I'm excited to like keep moving through. So, and yeah, if you feel called to share this video with a friend who needs to hear this today, I would really love that. You can also follow me on Instagram at Doolin. And yeah, those are the things. So I love you all very much. I hope you have a good Monday, and I will see you soon.